Hello, and welcome to Edupedia World. Today, we will be moving into the third part of our session on recruitment and placement, which is employee testing and selection. Now, in the previous session, we had focused on the methods managers use to build an applicant pool. And in this session, what we would be discussing is how to use these various tools to select the best candidates for the job. And the main topics that we'll be covering includes the selection process, basic testing techniques, background reference checks, types of tests, and so on. So, moving on to the class, why is careful selection so important, right? Once you review your applicant's resume, the next step is selecting the best candidates for the job, right? That's what we had discussed in our previous session. And nothing you do at work is more important than hiring the right employees. And it is important for three main reasons, which I have mentioned here. One is the organizational performance, the cost, and the legal obligations. Now, coming to the first point, which is the organizational performance. First of all, your own performance, right? As a manager, as an HR manager, or even as a department head or any sort of manager, your performance always depends on your subordinates. And employees with the right skills will always do a better job for you and the company. So the time to screen out undesirable employees is before they are in the door and not after, right? You do not want to realize your mistake once they have joined your company and they have become employees. And therefore, selection is very important. It is something you can take care of before an applicant becomes an employee. Second is the cost to hire and recruit. This is important because it's costly to recruit and hire employees. You might think, okay, it's just recruitment and you just need to select somebody. But it's more than that, and that's what we've been discussing in all these sessions, right? You need to hire, train, advertise. There's so many costs that go into just getting the right person and, even just for one employee. So even if you have to hire for a position of a clerk, right, that can cost about 30,000 rupees more in fees and supervisory time. And so you can imagine the cost of hiring a manager, and that would be easily 10 times as high as hiring a clerk. So there are a lot of expenses: your interviewing time, the search fees, reference checking, travel, moving expenses. There's a lot of cost to it, and you would want to spend that wisely. The third is legal obligations, right? So legal aspects are important because mismanaging the process may lead to legal implications, and you do not want to find yourself or your company in such a situation. So as an organization, you should be aware that you all have, or the company has a legal responsibility to ensure that no unlawful discrimination occurs in the recruitment and selection process, basically on the grounds of sex, race, disability, age, religion, pregnancy, and so on. So another mistake which companies do is a term called negligent hiring, right? And that means hiring employees with criminal records. So you don't want such problems either, right? You, as a company, you are responsible to ensure that you do not and you avoid negligent hiring, because you don't want to hire somebody who has access to your customers' homes and who has a criminal record, and then that's going to be a big issue. Especially, I'm sure you would have read a lot about these cab companies, right? Hiring the wrong sort of drivers and who have criminal backgrounds. And as a company, it is your responsibility to ensure that your customers are safe. So these are the three reasons why careful selection is important. moving on, basic testing concepts, right? So before we have a look at the various type of tests that we can perform to select the right candidate, let's understand the difference between these two terms, which is reliability and validity. So reliability is a test first requirement, and that refers to consistency of a test. And how do you know a test is reliable, right? The test that you're using as an organization, you need to ensure that it has consistent scores when a person takes it more than once. So, which means if a person scores 90 on an intelligence test on a Monday, and then 130 when he's retested or she's retested on another day, then you probably wouldn't have much faith in that test, would you? So, there are several ways to estimate the consistency or reliability. You could administer the same test to the same people at two different points in time, and then compare their test scores at time 2 with their scores at time 1, and this would be a retest estimate, right? And validity, coming to the point of validity, reliability on one hand tells you that the test is measuring something consistently, but it does not prove that you are measuring what you intend to measure. So validity actually ensures that you are measuring what you intend to measure. So, or at least what you think it's supposed to be measuring, right? So, moving on, the types of tests that are available. Now, we can conveniently classify tests according to whether they measure the cognitive ability, which is the mental ability, motor and physical abilities, personality and interests, and achievement as well. So let's have a look at each of these separately, right? So cognitive ability, the test for cognitive abilities. So these tests include tests of general reasoning ability, which is intelligence, and tests of specific mental abilities like memory and inductive reasoning. So intelligence test, also known as IQ, you would have heard of IQ tests, tests of general intellectual abilities. So they measure not a single trait, but rather a range of abilities, including memory, vocabulary, verbal fluency, and numerical ability. And intelligence is often measured with individually administered tests, and one of the most common tests are the Stanford Binet test and the Wechsler test. So there are also measures of specific mental abilities, and these tests are usually called as aptitude tests by psychologists, right? And most of you who would have completed their college degrees on the day of your campus interviews, most companies would have given you an aptitude test, and that is also one of the forms of selection. Now coming to the next point, which is the motor and physical abilities. You might also, as an organization, want to measure the motor abilities like your finger dexterity or the manual dexterity, especially if you're hiring a pilot, right? You would want to test his or her reaction time. And it also measures the speed and accuracy of simple judgment, as well as the speed of your finger, your hand, your arm movements. So there are various tests for various dexterity tests out there as well. And other than that, tests of physical abilities also may be required. Now, say for as an example of if you want to hire a lifeguard, right? So you would also obviously need to find out if they can swim, right, before they're hired. So that is a physical test. Then the third point is measuring the personality and interests. Now, a person's cognitive and physical abilities, they alone explain his or her job performance. So there are other factors like motivation and interpersonal skills, and they're equally important as well. So a non-performance of an employee is usually, most of the cases, they are obviously hired based on their qualifications, but when they're asked to leave or they're fired, and that is usually a result of personal characteristics such as the attitude or motivation, or maybe the temperament. So that is something you would want to avoid when you are selecting somebody, right? Try and avoid these issues so that tomorrow you don't have an unpleasant day. Now, employers use personality tests to measure and predict such intangibles. So, for example, with Hewlett Packard, HP, the selection process for the CEO, they put their finalists through a 2-hour, 900-question personality test. And then candidates had to indicate whether statements like, okay, whether, when I bump into a piece of furniture, do I usually get angry? Is that true or false, right? So those sort of questions on what your reaction would be, given a particular situation. And a lot of other firms, especially in the US, they use tests like Myers-Briggs and the Berkman method, personality assessment, to help new employees, understand what kind of job they would be best at. So I've just put a link at the bottom of this slide. Basically, it leads to the Myers-Briggs personality assessment. It's something you all could try out after this session, just for fun. You all could understand what your personality is like and what kind of jobs would suit you best, based on the personality. And this test is widely used in the US, and some of the companies in India also started using it. So it's pretty accurate, and probably would also help you understand more about yourself. So try it out. Next point is background investigations and reference checks, right? I did not complete the previous slide. Moving on. So what do personality tests measure, right? Personality tests measure basic aspects of an applicant's personality, such as introversion, stability, and motivation. And industrial psychologists have often focused on personality dimensions, and they refer to something known as the Big Five, right? And these dimensions usually include, dimensions like extroversion and emotional stability, agreeableness, openness to experience, and so on. Moving on, the next type of test is an achievement test. Now, that is something which you are all aware of, something that you all have been doing since school. And they test or measure what someone has learned. So most of those tests that you take in school are achievement tests, and they measure your job knowledge in areas like economics, marketing, or human resources, right? So achievement tests, in addition to job knowledge, they also measure the applicant's abilities. Like a typing test is also an example of an achievement test. Moving on to background verification and reference checks, right? So testing is only a part of an employer selection process. Other tools also include a background investigation. So why perform background investigations, right? So one of the easiest ways to avoid hiring mistakes is to check the candidate's background thoroughly. And doing so is not expensive, right? If it's done right, it's very useful. So there's usually no reason why even supervisors in large companies can't check the references of someone they're about to hire. It's quite simple. Right? So, and today, of course, you don't have to do it yourself. There are a lot of third-party service providers who do that for you, and this is becoming increasingly popular in Indian organizations too. And so a lot of Indian firms are using their services right now. So coming back to the point of why perform them, right? So lying on one's application isn't very unusual. And a survey has found that 23% of 7,000 executive resumes contained exaggerated or false information. So one is to verify the information provided by the applicant, and a lot of times what happens is people exaggerate on their CVs, which is a complete no-no. So those of you who have done that and think that it's okay to do that, you may want to rethink about it. And of course, uncover damaging information, right? Because even really big companies, sophisticated companies, can fall prey to criminal employees. So it is very important to conduct proper background checks. So, for example, in Chicago, there was a pharmaceutical firm that discovered that it hired gang members in the mail delivery and computer repair division. And what these criminals were doing were they were stealing close to $1 million a year in computer parts and then using the mail department to ship them to a nearby computer store that they had owned. So your search depends on the position that you seek to fill as well. So it doesn't mean that whatever position you hire, you go ahead and do all of these checks, right? Like the reference checks, their background employment checks, criminal records, physical medical exams, driving records, education check. Now, say if you're hiring an accountant, right? You don't really need to do all of these checks. The main check would be a credit record and an education record. At least you need to see what they have said is true. Whereas if you're hiring a security guard, it doesn't make sense to go into his or her education background or the credit background, right? You would rather go into things like a criminal record check, a reference check from his or her previous employer, and so on. So thank you for joining my class, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Next session, we will be discussing in detail on how to effectively interview candidates. Thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for more.